Hi guys, Dan and Kai here again from Crescent Mortgages, and today we're going to be giving you our top 5 tips for buy-to-let mortgages. So first of all, what is a buy-to-let mortgage? So this is a mortgage that you'll use to purchase a buy-to-let property, which is a property that you won't live in yourself. Instead, you'll let the property out to a tenant who will, or multiple tenants who will pay you a regular rental income.
Yeah, there are lots of reasons why people would possibly buy a buy-to-let property. A pension plan is often one we hear, medium or short-term investments as well, or potentially just to increase that regular monthly income alongside any other income you have.
Number 1, your buy-to-let mortgage affordability assessment. So unlike a residential mortgage, which will really focus on your personal income to determine how much you can borrow, a buy-to-let mortgage is mostly focused on what the rental income will be that the property produces. Now, there may still be some minimum income requirements for how much you earn from your personal salary or self-employed income. We'll come to that in a moment on one of our further points. But regarding the rental income, so it's really important that you remember that just because, for example, the property that you're looking at might produce £1,000 a month rent, and your mortgage payment on an interest-only basis, which again we'll give you more information about interest-only in a moment, your mortgage payment may only be around £200 to £300. That doesn't mean that the mortgage is automatically going to be agreed, because the lender will actually run a stress test based on a higher interest rate, because they believe that rates may be increasing in the future. So even though your mortgage payment might be, for example, £250, by the time the lenders run that stress test, it might be that the rental income needs to be around £1,200 a month for you to achieve the mortgage that you're hoping to get. So you need to find out what the rental income will be on the property that you're interested in. And then, to be honest, if you run it past your broker, they'll be able to run the numbers, run the stress test, and confirm if it's going to be possible that you can obtain that mortgage on that particular property.
Yeah, I think the stress test, as Dan said, is there for potentially increased rates. It's also there for rental voids and maintenance costs and other things that can happen when you own another property. And as Dan mentioned, that they will use a different interest rate to calculate. To try and give you an example, if you're looking at a £100,000 mortgage, the rental income would probably need to be somewhere from £520 to £665 if you're looking at the top and bottom end of most of those calculations, which generally, is achievable.
You can extrapolate the numbers from there. So if you're looking at a £200,000 mortgage, obviously double those figures. £300,000 mortgage, triple the figures, and you can start to see what kind of rental income requirements will be required to obtain the mortgage that you need. Number 2, your upfront costs. So first thing to highlight with a buy-to-let mortgage is that the deposit requirements are bigger than normal residential mortgages. So if you've purchased your own home, you'll know that you can get away with a 5 or 10% deposit. With a buy-to-let mortgage, you'll generally need a minimum of a 25% deposit. Now, I should highlight that there are a couple of lenders that might be able to accept 20%, but you are really, really limited and the interest rates are higher. So ideally, a minimum of a 25% deposit will be required.
Yeah, and on top of that, there are other fees that are involved. A lot of the fees are similar to residential mortgages, so sometimes there'll be an arrangement fee with the mortgage itself. Although they are bigger, generally in a buy-to-let, it's not unusual to find a fee for £2,000 rather than maybe £1,000 on the residential. And on top of that, you will see more likely to get a valuation fee, certainly when buying. You'll still have your legal fees. That doesn't change too drastically other than the stamp duty. The stamp duty, if you're buying an additional property, which generally a buy-to-let will be, that's an additional 3% within England at least. And the stamp duty obviously varies a little bit, but you do have to factor in generally a relatively sizable change in the stamp duty. Obviously, we don't give tax advice ourselves, so do check that. But stamp duties and deposit are the really big parts that you need to factor into your fees.
Number 3, consider the type of property that you're purchasing. So the type of property and the condition of the property will have a big impact on your ability to get a buy-to-let mortgage. So one example is the property will have to be in lettable condition at the point that the lender carries out the mortgage valuation, which will be quite early in the process. So some people do consider purchasing these properties kind of, potentially to do a full renovation, or possibly get themselves in there themselves, give it a lick of paint, sort out the kitchen, the bathroom before you're able to get a tenant in there. But if the valuer looks at the property during the mortgage application and feels that the property is not in lettable condition at that point, then their likelihood is that they'll feed back for the lender to decline the mortgage or significantly reduce the rental valuation, which may make it very difficult for you to obtain the mortgage.
Yeah, I think and by lettable, could you let it on day one? Could you physically let that property out? Maybe you'd like to increase it and make it better, but if you think it could be let on day one, that's roughly the sort of line that would be taken. Other variations or possible problems with properties, high-rise flats, so a 10th story, maybe an ex-local authority property, those two combined can be a little bit tricky. New builds, and generally properties with slightly obscure construction types as well can have a problem, similar on a residential, but maybe slightly more on a buy-to-let basis.
Should just elaborate a little bit further on my first point. So if you are purchasing a property and in the current condition, the rental valuation will be around £1,000 a month, and your intention is to, in the first few weeks of buying the property, paint, hardwood floor, carpet, fixtures, fittings, that kind of thing, which you think will increase the rental income to £1,200 a month. Again, the lender is going to base it on the current condition, so the current lettable valuation of £1,000 rather than the £1,200 once you've done the work, because the lender has no guarantee that you will do that work up to a decent standard once the mortgage is started.
Good point.
Number 4, the type of tenancy that you set up on the property. So there are lots of different types of tenancy agreements that you can organise. The most common is an assured short hold tenancy agreement, or AST, which it will be commonly referred to, which is usually around kind of 12 months. Now, if you just put one person or one couple or one family in the property on a 12-month AST, that's considered very, very standard, and pretty much every lender will be happy with that. If you start to break away from this and look at anything at kind of a bit less usual, maybe students, or houses of multiple occupancy, so a HMO, where you've got multiple tenancy agreements. If you're kind of subletting it through an agency, they're the obvious. Any other examples you can think of?
Maybe letting to a company.
Anything like that.
Corporate let,
corporate, will really reduce your options. They are possible, but it will reduce your options. So again, if that is your intention, make your broker aware when you have the initial conversation with them, so that they can let you know what kind of options you're going to have. I think the other one which has started to become kind of more and more popular is Airbnb, which up until recently was very, very difficult to get a mortgage on a property that is intended for Airbnb. There's possibly a couple of lenders that may consider it now, but it is still a big limitation. So you are going to be seriously limited if that is your intention. But again, run it past your broker and they can look at options for you. Number 5, final things to consider. So there are lots of areas that you can trip up, and there are lots of areas which are kind of specific to buy-to-let mortgages. Just to give you some of the kind of the obvious ones that we've discussed, which we think that you should be aware of. So the first one is, I'll look to my screen as well. Options can be very limited if you're a first-time buyer. So if you don't own your own residence, you may find it a lot more difficult to obtain a buy-to-let mortgage. Lenders generally, they need to be really careful that people aren't taking out a buy-to-let mortgage but actually intending to live in the property themselves. So if you're a first-time buyer, you are higher risk of possibly living in the property yourself. So then again, maybe one or two options if you are a first-time buyer, but it's a big limitation. Anything else you can think of?
On top of that, I think Dan mentioned if you own your own home, that is great, but if you own a property in general, that does help quite a lot. Minimum income, I think we touched on possibly earlier in the video. generally speaking, if you can have a £25,000 income, then that normally satisfies most. Although again, some have no minimum income at all, so that does help. Those are the really big ones.
Also, just to let you know that it's most common for people to take a buy-to-let mortgage on an interest-only basis compared to capital repayment. So if you take out a normal residential mortgage, it will probably be capital repayment, where your mortgage payment consists of the interest and clearing the capital down. So at the end of the term, you'll be mortgage free. It's more common to take a buy-to-let mortgage on an interest-only basis, where you are just paying the interest. Now, the benefit of this is that your mortgage payment will be lower because you are just paying the interest. However, because you're not paying the capital down, at the end of the term, you will still have the full mortgage balance to clear, where you may need to sell the property or pay it off with other means that you have at the time. More common on interest only, but you don't have to. It is down to your personal preferences, which again, discuss with your broker and they'll give you the relevant advice. Okay guys, we hope you enjoyed our top 5 tips for buy-to-let mortgages. I'm sure there's lots of questions, so if you do, give us a call, drop us a message, and hopefully we can assist you to find your first or second or third buy-to-let property.
Don't forget we're free.
Okay.